Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained, and today we'll be exploring the awesome 1999 action-adventure film, The Mummy, which was directed by Stephen Sommers, starring Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, John Hannah, Kevin J. O'Connor, Jonathan Hyde, Oded Fehr, and the talented Arnold Vosloo as Imhotep. The film is in essence a loose remake of the 1932 film The Mummy, which starred Boris Karloff as a titular antagonist named Imhotep, who had been dug up during an archaeological expedition in the early 1920s. During the original film, the researchers began to realize strange things about Imhotep, including the fact that his internal organs were not removed, leading them to believe that although Imhotep had been wrapped up like a traditional mummy, he'd actually been buried alive. Also buried with Imhotep was a casket carrying the curse that the high priest had been condemned with, and despite several warnings from the lead archaeologist, Sir Joseph Wemple, one of his assistants opened the casket and read a passage from the Scroll of Thoth, which not only awoke the mummy from his slumber, but also ended up driving the man crazy in the process. As the film progressed, we discovered the reason Imhotep had been condemned was due to the fact that he'd attempted to resurrect his forbidden lover, Princess Anck-su-namun. Now, several years later, Imhotep, who had disguised himself as a modern Egyptian named Ardith Bey, managed to convince Joseph's son to dig up another site where the tomb containing his lover was buried. The rest of the film essentially sees him attempting to woo a lady named Helen Grosvenor, played by the elegant Zita Johann, hoping to eventually mummify her and use her as a vessel to resurrect his lover. And just like the original film, the love between Imhotep and Anck-su-namun was at the core of the 1999 remake, with the ancient high priest doing all that he could to bring her back.
Have we not met before, Miss Grosvenor?
No, I don't think so. I don't think one would forget meeting you, Ardith Bey.
The remake follows Evelyn, her brother Jonathan, and a former soldier turned treasure hunter, Rick O'Connell, as they travel to Hamunaptra, which in Egyptian mythology was believed to be the city of the dead. The location is not only the source of priceless artifacts, but is also said to have contained the vast wealth of the pharaoh Seti I, which is why numerous people had set out in the past in search of the mysterious city, only to find themselves consumed by the merciless desert. Unfortunately for the enthusiastic tomb raiders, they accidentally awoke Imhotep, who had been cursed for eternity, and we see them spend the better part of the movie trying to undo their mistake.
Are you sure you want to be playing around with this thing?
It's just a book. No harm ever came from reading a book.
Producers Sean Daniel and James Jacks, both of whom had grown up loving Karloff's rendition, decided to do a remake of The Mummy in the early 90s and were granted permission from Universal Studios so long as they kept the budget under $10 million. Envisioning a low-budget horror film, the pair then recruited Clive Barker to direct the picture, who proposed a very dark and violent film that revolved around a cult of the mummy. Barker eventually pulled out, and horror legend George A. Romero was brought in, who even completed the draft of the script in 1994, before also bowing out due to a conflict with another film he was working on. Now, Sommers, who had just written and directed the successful live-action adaptation of The Jungle Book, was then contacted by the pair, who recruited him to direct the film. Sommers then began writing the script over the next 3 years, while he worked on his monster film, Deep Rising, another guilty pleasure of mine, and a film that I've also covered on this channel and will leave links to below. Now, Sommers eventually provided the producers with an 18-page treatment that was then handed to Universal Studios, who loved the idea so much that they approved production and increased the budget to $80 million. This in turn increased the scale of the picture and enabled Sommers to hire the creative team at Industrial Light and Magic to begin working on the visual effects for the film. Principal photography began in May of 1998 and lasted 17 weeks, with the crew shooting on location in Morocco before finishing up in the UK. Due to the fact that a lot of the scenes were being shot in the scorching heat of the Sahara Desert, the entire crew had to regularly drink a special fluid created by the medical team to avoid dehydration. They also had to contend with sandstorms, snakes, spiders, and scorpions, which forced a few of the crew members to be airlifted out after being bitten. During a 1999 interview for the film with CBS, Brendan Fraser even recounted the story of how he nearly lost his life on set during the scene where his character was being hanged. On their very first take of the scene, the wrong noose was used, which actually tightened around the actor's neck, causing him to pass out for 18 seconds before he was resuscitated. The role of Rick O'Connell was also coincidentally originally offered to Tom Cruise, who went on to star in a similar role in the recent remake. Although the producers did want a bigger name for the role, Sommers convinced them that Fraser was the perfect encapsulation of the comical Errol Flynn he'd envisioned when writing the script. The gorgeous and masterful Rachel Weisz was then cast as Evelyn Carnahan, a clumsy but intelligent Egyptologist that desired to be on the front line of archaeological discoveries. Her character was actually loosely based after Lady Evelyn Carnarvon, who, like her father Lord Carnarvon, was an Egyptologist. I think it also should be noted that her father, along with Howard Carter, was credited as being one of the people responsible for discovering the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922. John Hannah was cast as Evie's brother Jonathan, whose primary goal was to get rich quickly, without really putting any work into anything. I mean, the only reason he even accompanied his sister on her quest was because he learned that Hamunaptra was supposedly where the ancient pharaohs had hidden their wealth. You can tell that Hannah was having the time of his life with the character, and honestly, the dynamic between him, Rachel, and Brendan is what really carries the film. South African stage actor Arnold Vosloo was brought in to play Imhotep and was by far the most impressive actor that auditioned for the role, balancing the dual roles of a sympathetic lover and monster perfectly. He also had the most difficult role to play, as a lot of his scenes were shot with just him, covered with motion capture markers, alone, in front of a green screen.
I just said, look guys, sometimes I don't understand what it is that the effect's gonna be, because they almost have this other computer language that, no one understands but them. And I said, don't even bother explaining it to me, just tell me to the letter, to the T, what it is that you want me to do physically, and they're the best in the business, and once you trust them, you can fly.
Now, the film begins in 1290 BC with the affair of High Priest Imhotep and Anck-su-namun, mistress of the great pharaoh Seti I, who discovered their sinful act and was slain by the pair. Knowing that Imhotep had the power to resurrect her, Anck-su-namun then took her own life in front of the pharaoh's guards, giving her lover and his priests enough time to escape. After her burial, the dishonored priest broke into her crypt and took her remains to Hamunaptra, the city of the dead, with the intention of bringing her back. Unfortunately for Imhotep and his priests, they were all caught before the ritual could be completed. For their sacrilege, Imhotep's priests were mummified alive by Seti's guards, and Imhotep himself was forced to endure the curse of Hom-Dai, which involved the cutting out of his tongue and his live burial with a swarm of flesh-eating scarabs. The ritual also cursed him to become an immortal plague should he ever be resurrected, which is why he was buried within the elusive city of the dead, and kept under the watchful eye of the Magi, who were descendants of Seti's royal guards. Over 3,000 years later, soldiers from the French Foreign Legion, led by O'Connell, make a final stand against a local army, not knowing that they were actually fighting directly above the city of the dead. With the annihilation of the majority of his squad, Rick manages to escape getting shot after Imhotep's spirit manifested itself and scared the enemy soldiers away. And though it's not actually shown in the film, it's here that O'Connell discovers a small intricate box that is later revealed to be the key to both the Book of the Dead and the Book of Amun-Ra. After stealing it from O'Connell at a bar, Jonathan presented the box to his sister and told her that he found it in Thebes. Evelyn managed to get it open and found a map that seemed to point the way to Hamunaptra, and while Evie was convinced of its legitimacy, her boss and curator of the museum, Dr. Terence Bay, continued to assure her that the City of the Dead was only a myth. He also intentionally damaged a portion of the map to prevent them from finding it, and we later find out the reason for this treachery was because Dr. Bay was actually also a member of the Ancient Order of the Magi. Jonathan eventually admits to Evelyn that he'd stolen the box from an American who was being held in a nearby prison, leading her to successfully negotiate Rick's release by offering the warden 25% of whatever they found on their voyage. While on the boat towards their destination, they came across a band of American treasure hunters who were being led by famed Egyptologist Dr. Alan Chamberlain, played by the talented Jonathan Hyde. The group were also being guided by Benny Gabor, a cowardly former French Legion soldier who had served with Rick and abandoned him at Hamunaptra. Unfortunately for both groups, the boat was invaded by the Magi, who temporarily stalled their journey to the City of the Dead. After eventually making it to Hamunaptra, they started exploring the site at different locations, leading the Americans to find a chest between the legs of the statue of Anubis. Evie, who was in search of the Book of Amun-Ra, a golden book that contained all the secret incantations of the Old Kingdom, led the other team below the statue of Anubis, where they inadvertently found the tomb of Imhotep. Realizing the treasure hunters were getting close to their goal, the Magi, led by their leader Ardith Bey, attacked both groups and warned them to leave as there was evil buried beneath them. Rather than heed this warning, the two teams continued their respective projects, with Evie's group opening the tomb to reveal the juicy mummified remains of Imhotep, while the Americans opened the chest despite the warning on the lid that advised them not to do so. And after opening the chest, the team found the Black Book of the Dead, along with the canopic jars that carried Anck-su-namun's remains. That very evening, Evelyn stole the book from the American tent and used the key that Rick had discovered earlier to open the Book of the Dead. And after reading a passage out loud, the overzealous Egyptologist accidentally awoke Imhotep's mummified remains. Evelyn also coincidentally bore a striking resemblance to his former lover, which led the love-torn sorcerer to attempt to bring Anck-su-namun back by using Evelyn's body as a vessel. In order to regain his full might, the High Priest went around devouring the organs and life essences of the American treasure hunters that had unfortunately opened his chest. Luckily for Benny, he had once again managed to abandon his team to save himself by running away before they opened it. Even when he was confronted by Imhotep himself, the cunning survivor managed to endure to become the right hand of death. Now, as was written into the curse, Imhotep's arrival gave him several powers including regeneration, the ability to turn himself into sand, and the ability to control the desert sands by creating sandstorms. He also had the ability to wield the 10 plagues of Egypt to an unspecified degree.
Oh, Evelyn!
Oh, so you're still here?
We've got problems.
After returning to Cairo, both expedition groups began to work together along with the Magi, and although Imhotep managed to take Evelyn to the City of the Dead in his final attempt to resurrect the Anck-su-namun, Rick, Jonathan, and Ardith managed to free her. This enabled Evie to read from the Book of Amun-Ra, which turned Imhotep back into a mortal, and ultimately allowed Rick to defeat the High Priest. While all of this was happening, we saw Benny loading up the camels outside the city with as much treasure as he could find. Unfortunately for the snake, he accidentally triggered a booby trap set by Seti I to bring down Hamunaptra, trapping him inside the City of the Dead along with the terrifying scarabs, while Evie, Rick, Ardith, and Jonathan all made it out to find Benny's fortune waiting for them.
About Imhotep is that he has to be very powerful, very frightening, and filled with danger. So we sat down with Steve and worked out a whole bunch of things that we thought that he could do that would be really spectacular.
About 25% of the $80 million budget for the film was spent on special effects, which was provided by the geniuses over at Industrial Light and Magic, with Sommers wanting a completely new look for the mummy to avoid comparisons to the litany of remakes that had come before it. John Burton, who was ILM's visual effects supervisor for the film, then began developing draft sketches for the creature during pre-production, trying to create a mummy that was mean, tough, nasty, and also something that had not been seen before. After the creative team agreed on the look of the creature, they built a small 3D model of his upper body and worked on the color and texture further, before finally getting the approval from Sommers to render the creature over to CG. ILM then used motion capture technology on Arnold Vosloo to replicate his movements precisely, before utilizing a combination of live action and computer graphics for the end result.
It gives the audience the feel that the actor himself is the creature, because you're transferring his movement into our CG environment.
So we came up with a really tremendous synthesis of a new technology of capturing data, if you will, of a performance of a top flight first unit actor, and melding that in with our top flight character animation skills and creating something on the screen that's some sort of synthesis of both of those.
Another one of my favourite films growing up, The Mummy opened in theatres on May 7, 1999, and went on to defy expectations, recuperating more than half of its budget in its opening weekend, and going on to make over $400 million at the box office that year. The film also went on to have a few sequels, and a spin-off called The Scorpion King, starring the one and only Dwayne Johnson, which I hope to cover down the track. Well, that's all for today, folks. Thanks to all of you guys who requested we take a look at The Mummy. If there's any other stuff you'd like me to check out, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film and Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.
So what's your little problem got to do with His Majesty's Royal Air Corps?
Not a damn thing.
Is it dangerous?
Well, you probably won't live through it.
Winston Havelock, at your service, sir.